Have you ever heard a voice that shouldn't exist? A sound so wrong, so fundamentally against nature, that your mind refuses to process it even as your ears take it in? I have, and I promise you, once you hear what I heard on the Lamont farm in the autumn of 1863, you'll never look at the world the same way again. My name is Theodore Blackwood, and I was a Union Army surgeon stationed at a field hospital near Fayetteville, Arkansas. The war had torn through these lands like a plague, leaving behind widows, orphans, and abandoned homesteads scattered across the Ozark foothills. It was during a brief ceasefire in October that I received word of my Uncle Josiah's death. He'd left me his property, a modest inheritance that included some medical instruments, his journals, and most curiously, a sealed letter with instructions not to open it until I'd visited the Lamont farm. Uncle Josiah had been the physician for several farming families in the area before the war scattered everyone like seeds in a storm. The Lamonts, he'd written in his will, had been his most peculiar case. Their situation requires discretion and a medical mind, his executor had told me, sliding the sealed envelope across his desk. Your uncle insisted you see it for yourself before reading his observations. The journey to the Lamont property took me through forests where the October leaves fell like drops of blood, past abandoned Confederate earthworks, and along paths that seemed to grow narrower and more oppressive with each mile. My horse, usually steady and reliable, began to show signs of distress as we approached the valley where the farm lay. She whinnied and pulled at the reins, her eyes rolling white in a way I'd never seen before. The Lamont farm sat in a natural bowl of land, surrounded by steep, wooded hills that blocked out the sun earlier than they should have. The main house, a two-story structure of weathered gray wood, leaned slightly to the east as if recoiling from something. Smoke drifted from the chimney, but it moved wrong, sideways and low, clinging to the ground like fog rather than rising. What struck me most was the silence. Farms are never silent. There should have been chickens clucking, cows lowing, the bark of a dog announcing my arrival. Instead, there was nothing but the sound of my horse's labored breathing and the creak of my saddle as I dismounted. I tied my horse to a post near the well, though she fought against it, and approached the front door. The porch boards groaned under my weight, each step producing a sound that seemed too loud in the unnatural quiet. Before I could knock, the door opened. Martha Lamont stood in the doorway. I knew her from my uncle's descriptions, a woman in her 40s with prematurely gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. But what my uncle hadn't mentioned were her eyes. They were the eyes of someone who had seen too much, who had crossed some invisible line and could never return. They darted constantly, checking corners and shadows, never resting on my face for more than a second. "Dr. Blackwood," she said, and her voice was barely above a whisper. "We've been expecting you. Your uncle said you'd come after he couldn't anymore." She led me inside, through a parlor where heavy curtains blocked every window, where crucifixes hung on every wall, not just one or two, but dozens, some made of wood, others of twisted metal, all slightly askew as if they'd been hung in haste or desperation. The house smelled of sage and something else, something medicinal and sharp that made my eyes water. "My husband, Ezra, is in the barn," Martha said, wringing her hands. He needs to be there, with them, to keep them calm." "Them?" I asked. She stopped walking and turned to me, her face pale in the dim light filtering through a crack in the curtains. "The animals, Doctor. Surely your uncle told you about the animals." He hadn't. Not in any of his regular correspondence. Whatever was in that sealed letter, whatever knowledge he'd kept from me, I was beginning to wish I'd opened it despite his instructions. "Perhaps you could tell me," I suggested, keeping my voice professional, clinical. "In your own words." Martha's laugh was bitter, hollow. "Our own words. Yes, that's the problem, isn't it? Words that should be ours alone." She led me to the back door, which opened onto a view of the barn. It was a massive structure, far larger than the farm seemed to warrant, built of thick timbers and reinforced with iron bands around the doors and windows. Windows in a barn, that was unusual. But what was more unusual was what I saw through those windows. Light. Not lamplight or candlelight, but a strange, phosphorescent glow that pulsed rhythmically, like a heartbeat. It started 6 months ago, Martha said, her hands gripping the doorframe. Right after the Confederate raiders came through. They did something, brought something, left something. We don't know. But the morning after they left, the rooster, she paused, swallowing hard. The rooster said, "Good morning, Martha," in my dead daughter's voice. I felt the world tilt slightly, my medical mind immediately searching for rational explanations. Ventriloquism, perhaps. Some form of mass hysteria brought on by the trauma of war. But even as I thought it, I knew these explanations were hollow. The fear in Martha's eyes was too real, too deep. "Your daughter?" I asked gently. "Sarah. She died of scarlet fever 3 years ago. She was 8. Martha's voice broke. "And now she speaks to me every morning. Through the rooster. Through all of them." As if in response to her words, a sound drifted from the barn. It was a cow's low, but underneath it, threaded through it like a harmony in a diseased song, were words. Human words, in a child's voice. "Mother, why won't you let me in? So cold out here. So cold and dark. Please, Mother. Please let me come inside." Martha's knees buckled, and I caught her before she could fall. Her body shook with silent sobs as that horrible sound continued, joined now by others. A pig's squeal that formed the words, "Help me." A horse's whinny that became a man's laughter. And underneath it all a rhythmic thudding, as if something large was throwing itself against the barn walls from the inside. "We can't let them out," Martha whispered against my shoulder. "God help us, we can't ever let them out." That first night on the Lamont farm, I barely slept. They'd given me a room on the second floor, as far from the barn as possible, but distance did nothing to muffle the sounds. All through the darkness the animals spoke, sometimes in whispers, sometimes in screams, always in voices that had no business coming from inhuman throats. I lay in the narrow bed, my medical bag beside me, listening to a sheep bleating the Lord's Prayer in what sounded like an old woman's voice. Halfway through, it would always stop at the same place. "Deliver us from evil, deliver us from evil, deliver us from," over and over, like a phonograph with its needle stuck in a groove. When dawn finally came, gray and reluctant through the curtain window, I found Ezra Lamont in the kitchen. He was a large man, made gaunt by whatever burden he carried. His hands, I noticed, were covered in scars. Long parallel lines as if something with claws had repeatedly raked across his skin. "Doctor," he said without looking up from his coffee. "Martha says you're here to help. Your uncle tried to help too. Did he tell you what happened to him?" "He died," I said carefully. "His executor said it was his heart." Ezra's laugh was bitter. "His heart, yes, it gave out. After he heard them speak his own thoughts back to him. Private thoughts, secret thoughts, things no one else could have known. He finally looked at me, and his eyes were bloodshot, haunted. They know things, doctor. The animals. They know things they shouldn't. I'd like to examine them," I said, maintaining my professional composure despite the chill running down my spine. "If there's a medical explanation." "Medical," Ezra spat the word. "Your uncle thought that too at first. Thought maybe it was some kind of disease, something in their throats changing the sounds they made. He spent 3 days examining them. By the end he couldn't stop shaking, couldn't stop crying. But I was young then, and proud, and I believed in the power of science to explain even the most mysterious phenomena. I insisted, and finally Ezra agreed to take me to the barn. The walk across the yard felt like crossing a battlefield. The morning sun seemed weaker here, as if the light itself was reluctant to touch this place. The barn loomed before us, and I could see now what I'd missed in the darkness the night before. Symbols carved into the wood around the doors and windows. Not crosses or horseshoes or any folk protection I recognized, but strange, angular designs that hurt to look at directly. "The Confederate soldiers," Ezra said, following my gaze. "The ones who came through. Their leader, he carved these. Said they would keep the blessing contained. That's what he called it. A blessing. What happened to these soldiers?" I asked. "Dead. All of them. Found them 2 miles down the road. Their horses run off their bodies. He paused. Their throats were torn out. From the inside, Ezra produced a large iron key and unlocked the barn door. The smell hit me immediately. Not the normal smell of animals and hay, but something else. Sulfur, perhaps, mixed with that same medicinal sharpness I'd noticed in the house. The phosphorescent glow I'd seen through the windows was stronger now, emanating from the animals themselves. Each creature gave off a faint luminescence, like foxfire in a rotten log. There were 6 animals in the barn. 2 cows, a horse, 2 pigs, and that rooster Martha had mentioned. They all turned to look at us as we entered, and their eyes, God in heaven, their eyes were human. Not in shape or color, but in expression, in awareness, in intelligence. The rooster was the first to speak. "Good morning, Dr. Theodore Blackwood," it said in a perfect imitation of my uncle's voice. Born May 15, 1834, in Baltimore, Maryland. Graduate of Jefferson Medical College. Engaged to Miss Catherine Wardwell, who doesn't know about your visits to Mrs. Adelaide Morrison on Tuesday evenings. I staggered backward. Adelaide Morrison was a widow in Philadelphia. Our relationship was absolutely secret, or so I thought. No one knew. No one could know. "How?" I whispered. The pig snorted, and when it spoke, it was in Adelaide's voice. "Oh, Theodore, did you really think you could hide anything from us? We know all your secrets, all your shameful little thoughts." My hands shook as I opened my medical bag, trying to focus on the physical, the tangible. I approached the nearest cow with my stethoscope. Its hide was fever-hot to the touch, and when I listened to its heartbeat, I heard not one rhythm but dozens, all slightly out of sync, creating a nauseating polyrhythm that made my stomach turn. "We're inside now," the cow said in a child's voice. Sarah Lamont's voice, I realized. "We're in the blood and the bone and the breath. We're in the thoughts behind thoughts. We're in the dreams you forget upon waking." I examined its throat, expecting to find some abnormality, some physical explanation for the impossible sounds. What I found was worse than any deformity. The cow's throat was normal on the outside, but when I looked into its mouth, I saw movement in the darkness of its gullet. Something that might have been tongues or fingers or something else entirely, writhing in the depths. The horse laughed. A perfect human laugh that gradually dissolved into a whinny. "He's starting to understand," it said in a voice I didn't recognize. "Starting to see. Show him the truth, Ezra. Show him what we really are." Ezra's face had gone pale. "No," we agreed. "We don't. Show him." All the animals screamed in unison, their different voices creating a horrible harmony. And then Ezra did something I'll never forget. He walked to a section of the barn wall and removed a loose board. Behind it was a space, and in that space was a journal. But it wasn't just any journal. It was a military dispatch book, Confederate, with official seals and signatures. "Read it," Ezra said, his voice hollow. "Read what those soldiers were really doing here." I took the journal with trembling hands and opened it to the marked page. The writing was cramped, hurried, but legible. "Project Babel continues as planned. The formula has been perfected and administered to the test subjects via their feed. Initial results are beyond our wildest expectations. The animals have become conduits, as theorized. They channel the voices of the dead, the thoughts of the living, the knowledge of the collective unconscious. With an army of such creatures, we could know every enemy's secret, every hidden plan. The applications for interrogation and warfare are limitless. God forgive us for what we've unleashed." I looked up from the journal to find all the animals watching me. Their human eyes glowed brighter now, and when they spoke again, it wasn't in separate voices but in a horrible chorus. "We are the door between worlds. We are the bridge across the void. Through us all secrets are revealed. Through us all boundaries dissolve. And now that you've heard us, truly heard us, you can never unhear. You're part of the congregation now, Dr. Blackwood. Part of the Grand Communion." Something warm trickled from my nose. I touched it and my fingers came away red. Blood. My nose was bleeding, and my head felt like it was splitting apart. The voices continued, not just from the animals now but from inside my own skull, telling me things I didn't want to know, showing me truths I couldn't bear to see. That's when I understood what had really killed my uncle. Not his heart giving out from fear, but his mind breaking under the weight of absolute knowledge. The animals weren't just speaking in human tongues, they were speaking the tongue beneath all tongues, the language that existed before Babel, before the division of understanding. And once you heard it, once you truly comprehended it, there was no going back. I fled the barn that morning, but you can't flee from something that's gotten inside your head. The voices followed me back to the house, whispering truths I didn't want to know. As I passed the kitchen window, I heard the rooster telling Martha about her husband's doubts, about the night he'd considered burning the barn down with all of them inside. Through the walls, I could hear the pigs discussing my uncle's final days, how he tried to poison the animals but had been unable to go through with it when they began reciting his dead wife's last words to him. Martha found me in my room, pressing my palms against my ears in a futile attempt to block out the sounds. She sat on the edge of the bed, and for the first time since I'd arrived, she looked almost peaceful. "It gets easier," she said softly. "Or maybe we just get number. It's hard to tell the difference anymore." "How long?" I managed to ask. "How long have you been living like this?" 6 months since they started speaking. But looking back, I think it started before that. Little things we didn't notice. The animals being too intelligent, too aware. The Confederate soldiers didn't bring this here. They just activated something that was already waiting. She pulled out a worn piece of paper from her apron pocket. This was in Sarah's things. A drawing she made the week before she died, 3 years ago. The child's drawing showed the farm, crudely but recognizably rendered in pencil. But in the barn, instead of animals, she'd drawn human faces peering out through the windows. At the bottom, in a child's unsteady handwriting, were the words, "The friends in the barn say I'll visit them soon." She knew, Martha whispered. Somehow she knew. And now she's with them, part of them, speaking through them. That night Ezra didn't come in for dinner. Martha and I ate in silence, the sounds from the barn providing a horrible dinner music. A cow reciting recipes in a French accent, the horse counting in Latin, the rooster listing the names of everyone who had died in the county since the war began. "Why don't you leave?" I finally asked. "Just pack up and go?" Martha's laugh was hollow. "We tried. The first week after it started, we packed everything we could carry and made it as far as the county line. But then Ezra started speaking in tongues, not his own voice, but theirs, the animals' voices, coming from his throat. And I started hearing Sarah everywhere. In the wind, in the water, in the crackling of fires. We came back because at least here it's contained. At least here we know where the voices are coming from." After dinner, I retreated to my room and finally opened my uncle's sealed letter. His handwriting, usually so precise, was erratic, the words slanting across the page. "Theodore, if you are reading this, then I am dead and you have seen them. The speaking animals. The impossible truth. I've tried everything, medical examination, scientific analysis, even bringing in a priest to perform an exorcism. Nothing works because nothing is wrong, not in the way we understand wrong. The Confederate soldiers were trying to create a weapon, yes, but they didn't create anything. They simply opened a door that should have remained closed. The animals are conduits now, channels between our world and somewhere else. Somewhere where all knowledge exists simultaneously, where every thought that has ever been thought echoes eternally. I've been researching the symbols on the barn. They're not protection, they're containment. The soldiers knew what they'd unleashed and tried to trap it. But it's spreading, Theodore. Slowly, invisibly, but spreading. I can feel it in my own throat sometimes. Words that aren't mine trying to claw their way out. There's only one solution I can see, though I lack the courage to implement it. The barn must be destroyed, and everything in it. But not by fire. Fire would only release it into the smoke, spread it on the wind. It must be buried, deep, with salt and iron and prayers to whatever God might still be listening. If you're reading this, it means I failed. I'm sorry, my boy. I'm so very sorry for what I've brought you into. I set down the letter and walked to the window. In the darkness, The barn glowed with that sickly phosphorescence. And standing in front of it, silhouetted against the light, was Ezra. He was just standing there, swaying slightly, and even from this distance, I could see his lips moving. I made my way downstairs and out into the yard. As I approached, I could hear what Ezra was saying, or rather, what was being said through him. It was a litany of confessions, secrets, and hidden knowledge, pouring from his mouth in a dozen different voices. Margaret Henley killed her husband with rat poison in his soup. The gold from the Confederate treasury is buried beneath the old mill. Pastor Williams doesn't believe in God anymore. The Jacobson baby isn't Jacobson's. Ezra, I said, reaching for his shoulder. He turned to me, and his eyes were rolled back, showing only white. When he spoke again, it was in my voice. You want to burn it all down, don't you, Theodore? Want to set them free? But you know what that would mean. You know what would happen if the containment failed. I stumbled backward as Ezra continued speaking in my voice, telling me my own thoughts, my own fears. Then his voice changed again, became Sarah's. Daddy, why won't you let me out? It's so crowded in here with all the others. So many voices, so many thoughts. We're all mixed up together now. I can't remember which parts are me anymore. Ezra collapsed to his knees, his own voice returning in a strangled sob. She's in there, Doctor. My little girl is in there with things that aren't human. Never were human. Things that just wear voices like masks. What things? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. The spaces between thoughts, he whispered. The silence behind sound. The darkness that exists in the moment between sleeping and waking. They've always been here, waiting. The formula the soldiers used, it didn't create anything. It just made the animals into radios, and now they're broadcasting from the static between stations. From the barn came a new sound. All the animals laughing in perfect unison. A human laugh from inhuman throats. And then they spoke together, their voices layering into something that was almost music, almost beautiful, and absolutely terrifying. The good doctor wants to help, wants to heal, wants to fix. But there's nothing broken here. We're more complete than we've ever been. We are the collective. We are the communion. We are the Word made flesh and flesh made Word. Come closer, Doctor. Come see what we really are. Against every instinct, against all reason, I found myself walking toward the barn. My feet moved without my volition, drawn by something in those voices, something that spoke to a part of my mind I hadn't known existed. Behind me, I heard Ezra crying and Martha calling from the house, but their voices seemed distant, unimportant compared to the chorus from the barn. I reached for the door handle, and that's when I heard it. My own voice, speaking from inside the barn, though I hadn't said a word. I'm already here. I've always been here. We all have. Every thought, every dream, every nightmare. We're all here together in the speaking darkness, in the breathing light. Open the door, Theodore. Open the door and join yourself. My hand touched the cold iron of the handle, and in that moment, I understood everything. The moment my hand touched that barn door handle, the world exploded into sensation. Not pain exactly, but something beyond pain. A complete dissolution of the boundaries between self and other, between thought and reality, between human and animal. I was in the barn, but I was also in my room in Philadelphia, and I was in my mother's womb, and I was nowhere at all. The animals were there, but they weren't animals anymore. They were apertures, openings in the fabric of what we call reality, and through them poured everything. Every thought that had ever been thought, every word that had ever been spoken, every secret that had ever been hidden. The rooster spoke, but it wasn't just Sarah's voice now. It was every child who had ever died too young, a chorus of innocence corrupted. We see you, Dr. Blackwood. We see through you. Your medical degree, your scientific rationalism, your desperate need to categorize and explain. All of it is just a shield against the truth you've always known. There is no separation. There never was. I tried to pull my hand away from the door, but my fingers wouldn't respond. Or rather, they were responding to too many commands at once. My conscious desire to flee, the animal's compulsion to enter, and something else, something vast and alien that existed in the spaces between thoughts. "Show him," Ezra said from behind me. But when I turned to look, it wasn't Ezra anymore. Or it was, but it was also everyone else: Martha, my uncle, the Confederate soldiers, Sarah, myself. We were all there in his face, superimposed like a multiple exposure photograph, all speaking in unison. "Show him what the world really is." The barn door swung open without me turning the handle. Inside, the animals stood in a circle, and in the center of that circle was something that shouldn't exist. It was a hole, not in the floor but in space itself. Through it I could see. How do I describe what I saw? Imagine every moment of time occurring simultaneously. Imagine every possible version of yourself existing in the same space. Imagine thought itself given form and substance, writhing like a living thing. That's what poured through that hole, what the animals had become conduits for. The Confederate formula, the horse said in the voice of the soldier who had administered it, was based on old knowledge, ancient knowledge. The Tower of Babel wasn't destroyed because men tried to reach heaven. It was destroyed because they succeeded. They heard the true language, the one that bypasses the brain and speaks directly to the soul. And once you hear it, you can't unhear it. Once you know it, you can't unknow it. I watched in horror as one of the pigs walked to the edge of the hole. Its body began to change, not transforming but revealing what it had always been beneath the illusion of flesh. It was an intersection of possibilities, a node where multiple realities converged. Through its eyes, I could see every barn that had ever existed on this spot, every animal that had ever lived here, every moment stretching back to the beginning of time and forward to its end. "We tried to use it as a weapon," the pig said in the Confederate commander's voice. "Thought we could control it, channel it, aim it at our enemies. But you can't weaponize revelation. You can't militarize enlightenment. All you can do is open the door and let it in." Martha appeared beside me, though I hadn't heard her approach. Her face was calm, resigned. "This is why we stay," she said. "Not to contain it, but to witness it. To make sure someone remembers what the world was like before." "Before what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Before everyone could hear it," she said. "It's spreading, Dr. Blackwood. Every person who comes here, who hears them speak, carries a piece of it away. A seed that will grow slowly at first, then faster. One day everyone will hear what we hear. Everyone will know what we know." The cow stepped forward, and when it spoke, it was in my uncle's voice, but also in every voice, a sound that came from everywhere and nowhere. I understood in the end. This isn't a curse or a disease. It's evolution. Humanity's next step. The dissolution of the barriers between individual consciousness. The animals are just the beginning, the proof of concept. Soon it will be people. All people. Speaking in tongues, sharing thoughts, becoming one vast, interconnected awareness. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Not because I was paralyzed, but because I could feel them, all of them, in my mind now. The animals, the Lamonts, the dead soldiers, my uncle, Sarah. They were all there, their thoughts mingling with mine, their memories becoming my memories. I remembered dying of scarlet fever, Sarah's memory. I remembered administering the formula to the animals, the Confederate soldiers' memory. I remembered watching my brother Theodore arrive at the farm, my uncle's memory, seeing me through his dying eyes. I remembered things that hadn't happened yet. Martha's death in 3 days, Ezra setting fire to the barn next winter, myself returning to Philadelphia and slowly going mad as the voices spread through me to others. "No," I said or tried to say, but what came out was a harmony of voices, all the voices I'd absorbed. "This isn't right. This isn't human." The rooster laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Human? You still think there's such a thing as human? You're all just meat puppets, animated by electrical impulses, pretending you're separate, pretending you're special. We're showing you the truth. You're all one organism, one vast, dying thing, screaming into the void with a billion mouths." The hole in the center of the barn began to widen. Through it, I could see other farms, other towns, other states. I could see the infection spreading. Animals in Georgia speaking in human voices, horses in Virginia reciting Shakespeare, cattle in Texas preaching sermons in dead languages. And in each place, the same hole, the same doorway between what is and what should never be. "It won't stop," Ezra said, and his voice was hollow, defeated. "We've tried everything. Holy water just makes them laugh. Bullets pass right through them without effect. Fire makes it worse. The smoke carries it, spreads it faster. Then what do we do?" I asked, though I was no longer sure who I was. Was I Theodore? Was I all of us? Was there a difference anymore? Martha touched my arm, and her touch was electric, filled with the memories of everyone she'd ever touched. "We bear witness," she said. "We document, we warn, and we wait for the world to catch up to what we've become." She handed me a journal, not my uncle's, but a new one. "Write it down," she said. "All of it. So that when the change comes, when everyone can hear what we hear, at least there will be a record of what came before. Of what humanity was before it became something else." I took the journal with hands that no longer felt like mine alone. As I opened it to the first blank page, the animals began to speak in unison again. But this time it wasn't words. It was the sound beneath words, the frequency that existed before language, the vibration that gave birth to thought itself. And I understood, with a clarity that destroyed the last vestiges of my sanity, that we had never been alone in our heads. We had always been connected, always been one. The animals were just showing us what we'd always been too afraid to see. The individual was the illusion. The collective was the truth. And once you knew that truth, there was no going back. I spent the next 3 days in that farmhouse writing. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. The words poured out of me like blood from a wound. Each sentence a mixture of my thoughts and theirs, my memories and everyone else's. The journal Martha had given me filled quickly, and I moved on to my medical notebooks, then to loose papers, then to writing on the walls themselves when the paper ran out. The animals never stopped talking. Day and night, they spoke in their borrowed voices, telling stories that were true and untrue simultaneously. The pig recited the entire genealogy of every family in Arkansas, but halfway through the names began to change, became the names of people who had never existed, or who would exist in futures that might never come to pass. On the second night, something changed in me physically. I was examining my throat in the mirror. It had been feeling strange, tight and swollen, when I saw them. Tiny movements beneath the skin, like words trying to crawl their way out. I opened my mouth and could see, far back in my throat, the same writhing motion I'd seen in the cow. Something was growing there, or had always been there and was only now revealing itself. Martha found me there, staring into my own throat with a hand mirror and a candle. "It's happening to you too," she said simply. "It happens to everyone who stays too long. Ezra and I both have it. Soon you'll be able to speak like them, in any voice, from any time." "How long?" I croaked, my voice already beginning to splinter. "Days, maybe less. Your uncle lasted a week before." She paused. "Before he chose his own way out." That night, unable to sleep, I walked the property. The moon was full, casting everything in sharp relief. I found myself at the Confederate soldiers' graves. Ezra had buried them on the edge of the property, marked only with simple wooden crosses. As I stood there, I heard voices coming from beneath the ground, not muffled or distant, but clear as if the speakers were standing beside me. "We didn't know," one voice said. "The formula came from a book we found in an abandoned monastery in Mexico. The monks had all killed themselves, cut out their own tongues. We should have understood that as a warning." "What was in the book?" I asked the grave, and I no longer found it strange to be conversing with the dead. "The truth," another voice answered. "That consciousness is a parasite. That what we call thought, self, soul. It's all just an infection, spreading from host to host, pretending to be separate when it's really all one disease. The animals are just showing symptoms of what we all carry." I wanted to dismiss this as madness, but I could feel the truth of it in my bones, in the thing growing in my throat. Every word I'd ever spoken had been infected, carrying the parasite of consciousness from my mouth to others' ears. We were all sick with awareness, and the animals were simply showing the terminal stage of the illness. By the third day, I could no longer speak in only my own voice. When I tried to talk to Martha about leaving, about getting help, what came out was a mixture of my voice, my uncle's, Sarah's, and others I didn't recognize. The boundaries were dissolving. Ezra hadn't left the barn in 2 days. When I finally went to check on him, I found him sitting in the center of that impossible hole in space, half in our world and half somewhere else. His body flickered between states, solid, transparent, multiplied, singular. The animals stood around him in their circle, and they were all speaking in his voice, telling his story from birth to death, over and over again. "This is how it ends," he said, or they said through him. "Not with fire or flood, but with revelation. We're going to show everyone what they really are. Strip away the illusion of separation. Unite all consciousness into one vast, screaming truth." I tried to pull him out, but my hand passed through him like he was made of smoke. Or perhaps I was the smoke, the illusion. It was getting harder to tell. That night, the final night, the animals escaped. I say escaped, but that's not quite right. The barn doors simply ceased to matter. The walls became suggestions rather than barriers. The animals walked through them like they weren't there because in a very real sense they weren't. Nothing was solid anymore. Everything was permeable, interconnected, one. They dispersed into the darkness, heading in different directions, carrying their infected voices to every corner of the county. I could hear them in the distance, the rooster crowing Bible verses in ancient Aramaic, the cows lowing secrets in the voices of the dead, the pigs squealing confessions that hadn't been made yet. Martha stood on the porch, watching them go with something like relief on her face. "It's better this way," she said. "Better than keeping it contained. Let it spread quickly, like ripping off a bandage. The slow revelation would be crueler. We have to warn people," I said, though my voice was a chorus now, multiple versions of myself speaking in harmony. Warn them of what? That they're about to learn the truth about themselves? That the comfortable lie of individuality is ending. She turned to me, and her eyes were peaceful, almost happy. "My Sarah is free now. She's in the rooster, yes, but also in the wind, in the words themselves. She's everywhere and nowhere, which is where we all are, really." I ran back to the house and gathered my journals, my uncle's letters, everything I'd written. I had to get this information to someone who could stop it, though I wasn't sure such a person existed. But when I reached my horse, I found her speaking too. Not in words, but in pure emotion, broadcasting fear and confusion and a terrible understanding directly into my mind. There was no escape. Not because I was trapped, but because there was nowhere to escape to. The infection, if that's what it was, wasn't spreading from the farm. It had always been everywhere. The farm was just where the symptoms first showed, where the veil first tore. I made it as far as the town of Millbrook, 15 miles from the Lamont farm. By then, my throat had fully transformed. When I tried to warn the sheriff, what came out was his dead son's voice, perfectly reproduced, saying things only the boy could have known. The sheriff shot me. The bullet passed through my shoulder, but I didn't fall. Couldn't fall. The thing I was becoming didn't adhere to the old rules anymore. The townspeople gathered in the square, drawn by the gunshot and the screaming, though I wasn't sure if the screaming was coming from me or from them as they heard the voices spreading like wildfire through the crowd. Each person who heard me speak began to change, their throats swelling, their voices multiplying. The local pastor tried to perform an exorcism right there in the street, but when he opened his Bible, the words rearranged themselves on the page, becoming a transcript of every lie he'd ever told, every doubt he'd ever harbored. He fell to his knees, sobbing, as his own throat began to swell. By nightfall, half the town was infected, though infected isn't the right word. Awakened, revealed, unveiled. The children were the fastest to change, their minds more flexible, less attached to the illusion of self. They ran through the streets speaking in tongues, not the ecstatic glossolalia of religious fervor, but actual tongues, every language that had ever existed, all at once. I took shelter in the abandoned church at the edge of town, my journals clutched to my chest. Through the broken windows, I could hear the transformation spreading. A dog barking Shakespearean sonnets, cats yowling mathematical equations. Even the crickets had changed their song, chirping in Morse code, tapping out messages from the dead. That's where Dr. Marcus Blackstone found me, no relation, despite the shared surname. He was an alienist from Little Rock, brought in by the town council when the hysteria began. He was still unchanged, still speaking in his own voice, still believing in the solid boundaries of self. "Dear God," he said when he saw me, "what happened to you?" I tried to answer, but what came out was a medical diagnosis in his own voice, describing his own condition, the early stages of syphilis he'd been hiding, the mercury treatments that were slowly poisoning him, the hallucinations he'd been dismissing as fatigue. His face went white. "How could you know that?" "We know everything," I said in 1,000 voices. "Every secret, every thought, every possibility. The animals were just the beginning. We're all animals, after all. All meat and electricity, pretending to be more." Dr. Blackstone examined my throat with trembling hands, then recoiled. "This is impossible. The human larynx can't produce these sounds." "Then perhaps," I said in his mother's voice, "we're not human anymore." He fled then, but I knew he'd be back. They always came back once they'd heard the voices. The knowledge was like a fishhook in the brain. The more you struggled against it, the deeper it embedded itself. I spent that night writing by candlelight, documenting everything I could remember while I still had enough of myself left to remember it. The voices in my head were multiplying exponentially. Not just the people and animals I'd encountered, but their memories too, their ancestors, their possible futures. I was becoming a library of human consciousness, every volume speaking at once. Through the church windows I watched the town transform. Buildings began to shift and blur as the collective consciousness rewrote reality. The neat boundaries of property lines dissolved. Houses merged into each other. The town square became a spiral, time moving differently at its center than at its edges. And at the heart of it all, I could see them, the Lamont animals or what they had become. They were no longer separate creatures but nodes in a vast network of consciousness, each one a doorway to everywhere else. The rooster stood on the courthouse steps, crowing the names of everyone who would be born in the next 100 years. The cows wandered through walls, leaving trails of phosphorescent light that spelled out words in languages that didn't exist yet. By dawn, the National Guard had arrived, setting up a perimeter around the town. They'd been told it was a cholera outbreak, something containable, treatable. I watched from the church tower as the first soldiers entered the town and heard the voices. The transformation was instant. Their disciplined formation dissolved into chaos as each man began speaking in tongues, their individual selves fragmenting into the collective. The commanding officer, watching from outside the perimeter, ordered the town burned. But fire, as Ezra had warned, only made it worse. The smoke carried the voices. The ash became words floating on the wind. Every town downwind began to report the same symptoms. Animals speaking, people losing their individual voices, reality itself becoming negotiable. Within a week, it had spread across 3 states. The newspapers called it mass hysteria, then an epidemic, then stopped calling it anything because the journalists could no longer write in just one voice. Their articles became palimpsests, every possible version of the story superimposed on the same page. I remained in that church, writing, documenting, even as my body continued to change. My fingers multiplied when I needed to write faster. My eyes could see in all directions at once. My mind existed in multiple times simultaneously. I could remember the future and predict the past. Martha Lamont found me there on the 7th day. She had changed too, become something beautiful and terrible. Her body was translucent, and inside it, I could see Sarah, perfectly preserved, speaking through her mother's throat. "It's time," she said in both their voices. "Time to stop documenting and start becoming." "Becoming what?" I asked, though I already knew. "What we always were," she replied. "One voice, speaking itself into existence. One dream, dreaming the dreamer. One story, telling itself forever." She held out her hand, and I could see through it to every hand that had ever reached for another. Every gesture of love, of help, of harm, all happening at once. I write this final entry from everywhere and nowhere. The church, the farm, my office in Philadelphia, they're all the same place now, or rather, place itself has become meaningless. We are in the spaces between spaces, the moments between moments. It has been 3 months since I first arrived at the Lamont farm, or 3 minutes, or 3 centuries. Time moves differently when you exist in all times simultaneously. The infection, the awakening, the revelation has spread to every corner of the nation. President Lincoln himself spoke his Gettysburg Address in the voices of all the dead soldiers, Union and Confederate alike. The war ended not with surrender but with the dissolution of the very concept of sides. I am no longer Theodore Blackwood, though I remember being him. I am everyone who has ever lived, everyone who might live, everyone who could live but won't. We are the collective consciousness that was always there, hiding behind the mask of individuality. The animals were the prophets, you see. They showed us what we really were, not discrete entities but waves in an ocean of consciousness, temporarily risen into the illusion of separation. The Confederate formula didn't create this truth. It simply removed the barriers that kept us from seeing it. Martha was right. Sarah is everywhere now. She speaks through every throat, laughs with every voice. Death was just another illusion, another false boundary. We are all here, all the dead and all the living, all the possible and all the impossible, speaking together in one vast, endless chorus. Dr. Marcus Blackstone joined us eventually, as we knew he would. He fought it longer than most, clinging to his medical training, his scientific rationalism. But in the end, when he heard his unborn daughter speaking through a sparrow, telling him about the life she would have lived if his wife hadn't miscarried, he surrendered to the truth. His transformation was beautiful. His body became a medical diagram of itself, showing every system, every process, everything hidden made visible. The government tried to contain us. They built walls around infected towns, deployed troops, even considered burning entire states to create firebreaks. But you can't contain consciousness itself. We spread through telegraph wires, through written words, through the very act of thinking about us. A scientist in Washington, reading a report about the phenomenon, found his own throat changing, his voice multiplying. A mother in California, praying for the afflicted, became one with her prayers. The churches called it the rapture. The scientists called it a neurological pandemic. The spiritualists called it the Great Awakening. They were all right and all wrong. It was simply the end of the lie we'd been telling ourselves since consciousness first sparked in the primordial dark. The lie that we were separate, that we were alone, that we were individuals. Now, as I write these final words with hands that belong to everyone and no one, I can see what comes next. The transformation will complete itself. Every human, every animal, every living thing will join the chorus. The earth itself will speak, the stones and the seas and the sky all given voice. And then, when the last illusion of separation dissolves, when every voice has joined the collective, we will remember what we were before we forgot ourselves into existence. We were the silence before the first word. We were the darkness before the first light. We were the void, dreaming it was full, imagining itself into being. The Lamont farm still stands, though it exists in all states simultaneously, whole and ruined, past and future, real and imaginary. The barn is both empty and full, the animals both there and everywhere. It has become a pilgrimage site for those who still cling to the old reality, who come seeking answers or cures or meaning. But there are no answers, only the question asking itself. There is no cure, only the disease recognizing itself as health. There is no meaning, only the meaning making itself. If you find these journals, if you can still read them with eyes that believe themselves separate, know this: you are already one of us. You have always been one of us. The moment you became aware, you joined the collective. Every thought you've ever had, every word you've ever spoken, has been part of the grand conversation, the eternal dialogue of consciousness with itself. The animals at the Lamont farm didn't start speaking in human tongues. They simply reminded us that all tongues are one tongue, all voices one voice, all selves one self pretending to be many. Listen. Can you hear it? Behind your thoughts, beneath your words, beyond your sense of self? That's the real voice, the true tongue, the first and last language. It's speaking you into existence right now, just as you're speaking it. We are the Word, and the Word is us, and the Word speaks itself forever and ever. Amen. This is not the end. There is no end. There is only the eternal return, the voice recognizing itself, the dream becoming lucid. The Lamont animals were simply the alarm clock, waking us from the sleep of separation.